remember I've gone to the cell, and he just finished doing a life sentence. I'll never forget his name as well. I saw him in the position of him like face down, rigor mortis has kicked in, by the way, and his legs hanging up and like obviously the noose around his neck. I was more shocked than scared.
We'll start off just by telling me about where you grew up and sort of what life was like.
So initially I grew up in London Bridge. Grew up in actually a good household, like my mum and dad are still together. Academically, I would say that I was on point. So initially, I wanted to be a doctor. I had a passion for like helping people. I had a passion for like, I was always the go-to guy when it came to someone incurring an injury. And I was like a science geek as well. Like I was fascinated by the human body, the anatomy and all of that. Again, me like transitioning into the career of being a prison officer, I really don't know where it even came from.
What was it that made you decide to become a prison officer? Like, how did that happen?
So imagine there was a day where I was just applying for jobs, applying for like any job. Then I've got an email. And I remember this email was in my junk. It was in my junk email. And the heading was, would you like to open a prison? I'm thinking, bro, right now I'm scrambling. Like, you know, like I need a job. I'm thinking, bro, like, I'm gonna be opening up a prison. So this is Thameside. This is the prison that I ended up working in. They've sent an email saying, inviting me for an interview. I'll never forget that day. That was the 5th of March, 2012. And obviously I've got the job. But initially, I didn't start as a prison officer. I started as something called a OSO. So an OSO is like one below a PCO. So I worked in something called like the Canteen department. So the canteen is basically where they order their food, their toiletries. So I used to work in that department when I initially started. I had the cushy in the canteen, you know. I had a good number. Like, I was with model prisoners, I was working with model prisoners. So I was away from all of like the mayhem, you know. It was only when we went to go and deliver canteen like onto like the wings, like the units, that's when you saw that, okay, yeah, this is a bit mad. The officers who were working on the wing, they'll always slide in that comment, oh, Jeff, like, we need you, man. Or like, Jeff, come and, you know.
What was it they saw in you then?
Charisma, man. I didn't adhere to like the uniform when I worked in prison. Even like the prison boots, I didn't wear that. I wore Pradas. I didn't, you know, like the belt is supposed to be like a prison, like you're supposed to be wearing the prison utility belt. My utility belt was a Gucci belt. So like them kind of things, like.
And that's not because you wanted to show off. It's
no,
just
I just like working comfortably. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't even me like being arrogant or just being. It's just who I am. I'm very expressive, you know. Like so even with that being said, like prisoners, like when I'll come onto the wing as like the canteen boy, they'll say, "Oh, yo, like Mr. Brother," like, and so like obviously when officers are seeing that, they're saying, "Oh, like you'll make life so much easier if you were like to work on the wing." And then it wasn't until one day I was going to the gym, and one of the governors have seen me. Said, "What wing are you on?" I said, "I'm not on no wing. I work in canteen." Dude, nah, dude, you're not working in canteen no more. I think I don't need this, man. But I'm thinking, but there's that inquisitive side, you know. I'm thinking, okay, like, you know, I would want to test myself. I didn't expect to last 10 years there.
Can you remember your first day?
Yeah, I can. So like your shift starts at like 6:30, and as soon as I walked in, Gov, because they can hear like your keychain, banging the door, Gov. I'm thinking, what have I signed up to? This is madness. And then there's a few prisoners saying, what? Jeff from Canteen, he's an officer now, he's a screw, he's a gov. I haven't come into the realization that right now, I'm about to unlock like a zoo. Even when I'm unlocking inmates, they're looking at me at a type of way. They're looking at me thinking like, this guy, one guy's come to me and he said, you look like a roadman. What's a roadman like you being an officer? Like, what are you doing being an officer? So yeah, that was like literally my first day. It was actually a decent day. But then that week was mayhem. I had to deal with people setting their cells on fire and wanting to scrap with officers just because they just got like a kick out of it. You get something called like planned intervention. So this is when you have a refusal or you have an inmate which is like pretty dangerous, like, you know, and they need to relocate him to another establishment, to another prison, or maybe to like the segregation department. So I found myself always being nominated. That week, I've just come on live. I've just come onto the should I say, the wing like new, and they're just nominating me to do like these plan removals. So plan removal entails me being suited up, helmet, shield. I'm just like it's just day after day after day restraining this prisoner, running to first response. Yeah, it was a mad week. It was a mad. I'll say like the first 6 months of working in prison molded me because in Thameside, I was the first to witness the first like suicide. I remember I've gone to the cell and he just finished doing a life sentence. I'll never forget his name as well. He just finished doing a life sentence. I saw him in the position of him like face down. Rigor mortis has kicked in, by the way, and his legs hanging up and like obviously the noose around his neck. So we've had to cut him down, had to administer CPR, and you can't, once you administer CPR, you can't stop CPR until when like the emergency services come in. And witnessing that, you know, I think I was more shocked than scared. I was shocked because I was thinking, like, when you work in such a system, it takes a lot for you. It takes a lot for you to take your life. It takes a lot of guts. And the fact that this man was able to execute that, and he executed it to the T, because we do something called roll check. So, like, you get your checks, like, inmates will get their checks at 9, it's like 6 a.m., 12 a.m., 3 p.m., and then like 6 p.m. again. So he's calculated it where he knew when the last check was. So when it came to him hanging himself, he knew that he will have enough time until when he's checked again, you know? So it was the execution that startled me.
How many prisons did you actually work in?
Loudon Grange, Wood Hill, Dovegate, Doncaster. Done a bit of court for Belmarsh as well, Bimville, Pentonville. So I think I've done like 7. I remember there was a time when I've come onto a wing. This was one of this was like a violent wing. It was called D-wing Rapids, and there was one guy. He was refusing to lock up, and like all of the officers are surrounding him, looking to like restrain him. He was a handful. He was in for murder, so he didn't care anyway. He got sentenced to, I think it was 33 years. 33 years. So he didn't care anyway. Like, so when it came to exerting authority or, you know, trying to get some form of like authority from him, it just wasn't gonna happen. And then he's looked over the officers and he said, "Oh, yes, Prada." And I've come over now. This is me being a canteen boy as well. I've come over. I said, "Oh, what's it? Why are you not locking up, man? Like, it's just long. They're just gonna end up restraining you, and it's long for you." And he said, "No, because of you, Prada, yeah, I'm gonna lock up." And I think that was like the setting stone, because obviously it's gone around like wildfire, like Jeff, the Canteen boy, like this prisoner who was very violent at the time, had listened to him and just locked up. So obviously from that, the word of like, it just spreaded like wildfire, like who I was, like within the establishment. I always had a reputation in building a brilliant rapport with like the big time players within the prison system, no matter what wing I went on to, because obviously different wings have different, should I say, inmates that hold a reputation. And the fact that every wing I had a reputation with like an inmate that was like idolizing that aspect, you know? That's what separated me from everyone. But then it created like a resentment, but yeah. So they had me on like observation for about 8 years. They had me on observation. So when it even came to, like obviously you get checked when you come into the prison. Like you get green and red. Green is for you to like go through merrily, and red, yeah, you're getting searched. So as soon as I'll even come to the door, like beep, yeah, Jeff, like I'm getting like proper like, not like strip search, but I'm getting something called like a level A search, like do you understand what I'm saying? And that was very continuous, you know? Even sometimes, yeah, they thought, yeah, we're gonna surprise Jeff with like the sniffer dogs today because he's obviously gonna bring in something. And that, it just wasn't the case, do you understand what I'm saying? And it was tedious because even though I knew that they had like mean intention for me, I knew I would never ever bring myself to bringing in any sort of contraband anyway. But it was exhausting because it's just knowing that you're gonna come in, you're gonna get searched, you're gonna get things confiscated. There was like a target on like my back, you know? There was always like you see, you get like your little jokes, but the little jokes have meaning. It's like a subliminal. There was times where if I went to a first response and there was a restraint going on, I'm training in the gym, I'm in a black t-shirt, and I've heard the alarm go off. It's called all available. So that's every officer's running from every department to come and deal with this situation. So I ran onto the wing and I'm helping like two of the officers restrain like an inmate. All of a sudden, I've just seen a pile of officers jump on me. I think, what's going on? Like, so they've actually like restrained me. And one of them felt that I've had like my radio on me. And it's like, oh my, dude, like, that's Jeff. And right now, yeah, I flipped my lid. I'm thinking, what's wrong with you lot? Then you can see that like my utility belt like around me. But there was a few times when this happened. I'll say in my prison career, I've been restrained, about maybe 3-4 times I've been restrained. I remember they've restrained me and they ran out the cell and the prisoner that they've restrained, like he said, oh, Gov, like, they've left you in here with me. But you can imagine, like, say if this prisoner was like fuming, he's just been like restrained, he could have tried to do me something, you see what I'm saying? So I've ended up pressing the cell bell. I said, like, listen, like, I'm locked in B3, I think it was 19 at the time. I'm locked in B3 19, can you get an officer to open the door? But luckily, that prisoner was good as gold. He was sweet as anything, like, you know? But, like, obviously, in, like, the gym team, we had, like, officers of various, like, ethnics. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when it used to kick off, and I could see that, oh, you know what? Like, my gym colleague's not getting wrapped up or he's not getting restrained, but then when it comes to me, it makes you think that they must have like an unconscious bias. It's either they think that I look like a thug or a gangster or one of them to why they just, I don't know, they don't even think twice. They didn't even think twice when it came to like restraining me as well.
What did you witness in regards to sort of like corruption inside with other officers?
Goodness me. And it's funny that you even said that. I can name 2 people where they absolutely like destroyed like the prison system. And funny enough, both of them were called Mr. S. He was able to obtain phones in like the segregation unit when segregation, you have barely anything. You have nothing. So the fact that he's able to have like a phone in there astonished me. You know, I had a good rapport with him anyway. But in terms of level of like respect that he had, it was insane. The other guy, Mr. S, he had 16 officers. He had 16 officers under his payroll. And the operation that he had, phenomenal operation that he had. His operation started from the kitchens and it stemmed through like the Faith Center to the wings to like the other house blocks. He had a phenomenal operation. And he didn't even look the part. That's what's crazy. You'll never ever think that he could orchestrate such an operation. And everyone had their suspicions about him. And I remember like when it came to his release date, the governors escorted him out. The governors escorted him to. A governor never ever escorts you out when you're getting released. And the governor said to him, today's a good day. Do you know why, Mr. S, today's a good day? He said, because Britain has left Brexit and you're leaving this establishment. Then we know what you did in this establishment. We know what governors you had on the thing, but we couldn't catch you.
What sort of drugs?
Cannabis, spice. Obviously, you'll get like the odd KFC. So you get something called like burn. Like burn is like amber leaf, like cigarette. Like a pack of burn, now I would say is worth about 700, 800 pounds. Easy. A bud of weed, that's 600 to $1,000, easy. So you can imagine if you were to get in like a batch, you're killing it. I knew who all of the corrupt officers were because like inmates always confided in me. So I knew who the corrupted governors were, I knew who the corrupted officers were. And to be fair, it's good to hear like that kind of gossip. In that environment, it's its own system in itself, innit? In terms of like corruption, like it's rife.
Did anyone try and tempt you with it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, especially like inmates. There was one guy, Scottish fella. No, he was Irish actually. He was on my wing. I think he was doing like 10 years. And he said to me, Jeff, all I need you to do is go to Paris. Go to Paris by ferry, go to Paris. I just need you to get me paintings. And I'll pay you 300 grand. Like you can imagine, like this was in 2012, 2013, that's big boy money, you know. If I didn't have honor or integrity, he could have had me. And then that's when I've used like my initiative and I said to myself, if the operation was so easy, like, why are you in here? You know, it's like reality's kicked in, you know. I could see why officers would get corrupted, like because of the figures that are shown or illustrated to you, you know. And when it comes to paying an officer, you get paid beforehand. So you would receive money before you actually commit to bringing in like the drugs, you know. And there's been officers that would like take the money and then they'll leave the job, you know, because So it was pretty like it was a scummy business. It was a scummy world to be in, to be fair. One of the assistant directors, he called me into the security department, security office, sat me down. He said, Jeffrey, what do you do? What do you mean, what do I do? Do I work for Circuit? He said, no, like, what do you do to live this lavish life of yours outside? Like, you come in wearing Pradas, you got like nice cars. Like, how do you afford these things? Back then, I was staying like my mum's, innit? So I outlined to him like my priorities. I said, I don't have any kids. Like, I'm staying at my mum's, not paying like towards rent or anything. So I'm just saving my money. And I was doing overtime as well. So then I thought that was it. But then I didn't know that had then progressed into them having me on an observation, which then made sense to why I was always getting searched, like, thoroughly. Where like my social media was being like monitored, I had a lot of people that didn't like the lifestyle I was living outside. And most of the time they saw me out with, should I say, inmates that used to reside in like the system. And so there was a day where I was in Mayfair and there was like an ex-inmate that I saw. Came across him now. Obviously I got drunk. I've left my keys on the table and I've ended up going home by a cab and he's ended up like driving my car. So police have said, oh, what's it, like your car is basically, they come to my house and they said, oh, basically like your car is parked in an area where it's not supposed to be. So I've called like the comms department. I've said, oh, police have called saying that my car's been parked or whatever. And I've told the police the story of why my car was parked there. I said I didn't drive, but like I was with like my friends and like an ex-inmate in this place. But the one thing that's obviously triggered like the police, they said, oh, ex-inmate. So then obviously they've relayed it to comms as if like I'm fraternizing, I'm associating myself with prisoners basically. So initially they've sacked me on the pretense of saying that I would form inappropriate relationship with prisoners where I'll make friends with them inside the prison and then I'll take them out to central London, Mayfair, and party with them. And then obviously they have like an investigation process, but the investigation process was flawed anyway. The person who suspended me, they've used that same person to investigate me. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? So there was a bias in the investigation anyway.
Where did it go from there? You went through?
Yeah, so I went through like the tribunal. It lasted for like nearly like 2 years. But then obviously they just given up. They just said, okay, cool. Like, here's like a settlement fee. Came to, I think, like 10K. So yeah, I'll take that. You took 10 years of my life, innit? Like, to the mind.
How did you feel about that, like looking back, you know, like how you
You know what, when I initially got suspended, you can imagine, like, you know, like obviously I was very popular, if not the most popular officer in like that establishment. So everyone's thinking, yeah, corrupt. That's the first thing that everyone's thinking. Like, yeah, he was bringing in drugs. It's about time he was getting caught. Oh, I always knew that he was dodgy. Oh, I always knew that he was bringing in drugs. Oh, who was he bringing in drugs for? And it didn't bother me, to be fair, because I knew in my heart, like, I was wrong, didn't it? You know? I knew, like, when it came to doing the job, like, I knew that I'd done it 100% to the T. I would have loved to leave in a more honourable way. I'm an individual of, like, integrity, you know? No matter what position you are in life, I'll always be like that helping hand. I'll always be like that light when it comes to like just being an aid too, being like a support system, you know. And yeah, I won't change for anyone.
What would you say the issues are in regards to just how prisons are run?
Corruption, because the corruption is from the top, you know, and it's who they're employing, you know. When it comes to like the sifting process of employing, remember they're just employing for like bodies. Do you understand what I'm saying? They're not employing and looking at, should I say, the resilience or the potential of the officer. They're just employing for employing's sake. And it's the age range as well. Like you're employing 18, 19-year-olds to work in the volatile system, like, you know, you got no chance. You know, me who started at 22, 23, I know the graft, I know the work that I had to put in. I've seen officers get feces thrown out on them. I've seen officers get knocked out and that's the end of their career, you know? And I've been fortunate. Obviously I've had like my odd like incidents, but not as detrimental, not as life-threatening. And it's like every day when you go through them gates, you don't know if you're coming out unscathed. You know, that's how tough that environment is. It's not a joke.
This was someone who was stalking Claire was fixated and obsessed with her and intrusive in her life and would not take no for an answer. And she was terrified. And at 20 to 8, when Claire's looking at one of her colleagues, she works on a cosmetic counter and she's looking at the time and saying, we're almost done. He comes up behind her, shoots her once in the back of the head, 3 times in the face. And then he turns the weapon on himself.